This interview is so important. It's about a big question. Could British citizens really be arrested and prosecuted for war crimes and crimes against humanity committed because of Israel's onslaught against Gaza? Now, you may think it sounds far-fetched, given the impunity long enjoyed by Israel and indeed the role of the British state in arming and facilitating Israel's genocide. But a legal team have launched a major legal case, submitting a detailed report to the Metropolitan Police against 10 British individuals for alleged war crimes and crimes against humanity. This comes in the context of a broader set of legal challenges, both in individual countries and, of course, for example, the International Criminal Court issuing arrest warrants for Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, and his former Defence Minister, Yoav Gallant. Now, I've spoken to a member of the legal team here in Britain, the barrister Sean Summerfield. He specialises in international criminal law and human rights. I start by asking him, how did this case come about and why did these lawyers decide this was a case they needed to pursue?
I think it's probably quite clear that the report comes, or is certainly situated within the context of a much wider solidarity movement. We've seen protests up and down the country, people turning out in tens of thousands week in, week out to protest the current state of affairs in Gaza and more broadly the occupation and the situation in Palestine. States have systematically failed the Palestinian people, and when that happens, it falls on civil society and lawyers to do what they can, I think, to provide accountability. But for us in this report, we are very much lawyers. And so although the report is situated within that broader context, for us, it's about following the evidence. And that's what we did here. We came together, it's me, it's a small team of barristers and solicitors, in particular the Public Interest Law Centre and Paul Heron, who's the director of that. And we've been working closely with the Palestinian Centre for Human Rights as well, who've been integral to the research that we've had to conduct, and a team of researchers in The Hague who really deserve credit for putting together and compiling the dossier that we put forward. Grave crimes, it's war crimes, it's crimes against humanity. And when the evidence suggests that they have been committed by whoever they've been committed by, there needs to be accountability. And the evidence that we collected suggests that Brits have been involved. They've been over to Israel, they've joined the Israeli military, and they've been fighting out there. And the evidence we submit suggests complicity in atrocity crimes. And that really is the background to the report. That's why we think it's so important. And that's why the submission to the Met War Crimes team.
Now, I've read the summary. Now, obviously, the report is not publicly published, and that's, of course, to avoid jeopardising any possible future prosecution of the 10 individuals. I think people can understand why it's not been released, because that would obviously jeopardise any potential public prosecution. What can you tell us, though, that's actually in the report? What are the sorts of, I guess, allegations that have been made against these 10 British citizens?
So the International Criminal Court has jurisdiction over 4 crimes: war crimes, crimes against humanity, genocide, and the crime of aggression. The last 2 of those are very much leadership crimes, and we've seen arrest warrants from the ICC in respect of Benjamin Netanyahu and others. War crimes and crimes against humanity, however, can be committed by foot soldiers and by the officers that command them. And that is very much the focus of this report. It includes the whole range of war crimes and crimes against humanity, and there's a big overlap there in terms of the definition of them both. But in short, it includes murder, includes killing of Palestinians, it includes the indiscriminate targeting of civilian areas, and civilian areas that are very clearly demarcated as civilian areas that include hospitals as well. It includes the consecration of particular sites and the forced displacement of people as well. So all of those constitute both war crimes and crimes against humanity. And we submit that there is evidence of these 10 Brits involving themselves in those crimes.
I mean, anyone who spends time on the hideous atrocities being committed live streamed, I mean, I think this is an important point which I'll come on to. It's grim stuff. I have to sift through any of the evidence, often video and post-graphic evidence on what's happening. We know from the summary of the report, talks about, for example, one witness is saying dead bodies scattered next to each other. One recorded a blanket from the police to find the bodies. My uncle, my son, my nephews, my brother-in-law. Someone saying their father, husband, and children were forced to strip. They were taken one by one in the middle of the glass-strewn living room. A soldier beat them with an electric cable, large billiard stick. Bulldozers running over dead bodies, obviously desecrating the dead. Corpses scattered on the ground, especially in the middle of a hospital courtyard. Now, I mean, these are actually examples here. These are these testimonies. What I guess, and I'm curious because, as well as some would argue, well, I've argued this is the most documented crime as it actually happened. I mean, that's because of social media and new technology, the internet, and in people's phones. But it's also the most confessed crime as it actually happened, and that speaks to impunity, doesn't it? The IDF soldiers have willingly posted war crimes on the internet. And Al Jazeera did a documentary which itself detailed that. Richard Sanders, the journalist, I interviewed about that. I mean, is that partly what has helped your investigations, though? The fact that many IDF soldiers, potentially British citizens, obviously amongst them, have willingly posted in order to boast, or frankly for comic amusement, war crimes committed in Gaza.
Absolutely it is. The report and the vast majority of the evidence that we've collected that has gone into that report, and I don't want to go into specifics that, as you've alluded to, would perhaps lead to the identification of these suspects because it could prejudice any investigation or prosecution that might follow. But the majority of the evidence is open source, and you might find that surprising. I think a lot of people will find that surprising, but it's the reality of this conflict, as you've said. If you have soldiers who one might think ill-advisedly are documenting what might well amount to a war crime, then they ought to expect, you might think, that lawyers will take that information and present it as evidence against them. And so although we have testimony, and you've referred to some of that, and the Palestinian Centre for Human Rights have been exceptional in helping us to obtain that, it's the open source evidence that perhaps is the most damning in respect of the individual suspects.
Why is this such an important case? What do you think? Why does it matter in terms of broad context? Because, in the most narrow sense, there were 10 individuals identified who have allegedly committed these crimes, and therefore it's about pursuing justice for 10 individuals. But it's not just simply about the 10 individuals, clearly. So why is it? Why is it important? What is the general? What are you seeking to achieve in a broader sense?
War crimes and crimes against humanity are grave international crimes. Okay, the gravest crimes it's possible to commit. If there is evidence that anyone has committed those crimes, there needs to be accountability for it, because international criminal law matters. It's the framework with which we hold people to account. If there is evidence, and we suggest there is, it needs to be properly examined. And if it leads to arrest warrants and prosecutions, then that's where it leads to, and that's now on the Metropolitan Police to do that. But the Public Interest Law Centre is a British-based organisation. We are a team largely of British lawyers as well. And I think everybody has an interest in making sure that if war crimes are committed by Brits, there's accountability, because nobody wants those war crimes in their name.
Well, I mean, something I'm going to ask you as well, just as your opinion as a lawyer. I've often said on this channel, we've talked about never let this be normalized, that people watching and listening should never allow themselves to stop being shocked by what's actually taking place, facilitated by the British government, I would know. That people should tell themselves every day, I can't believe this has really happened. They should, whatever, we understand dynamics and nothing obviously naive, but you keep saying that. And I'm interested just in terms of why this is important, because not just for the people of Palestine who are suffering unimaginable horror, but as a lawyer, are you not concerned that what we're seeing is the normalization of some of the worst possible atrocities it's possible to commit against human beings? Unless these legal actions are taken, then international law, whatever its huge problems, will just collapse, and then you get a descent more generally into barbarism.
Yes, I think so. I think it's why it was so encouraging to see that the ICC took their time, but then did act, and we have arrest warrants now, and that does in itself send a message that the international community, for all its failings and its failure to support the Palestinian people for decades now, will take action when it comes to these grave international crimes. And the principle of complementarity means that individual states have an obligation to prosecute. And the International Criminal Court is really only engaged when states are either unwilling or unable to prosecute. And so if there is that, and there really is, that very clear obligation on states to act, then they need to be doing that. And if as lawyers we can encourage that, and in doing so uphold the principle of international criminal law, then all the better. I think there's a secondary point here to the report as well. The primary focus, of course, is on accountability. But if it sends a message as well to individuals with dual nationality who are perhaps thinking about going out there and joining the Israeli military or any foreign power engaged in conflict, in what now must be full knowledge of at least the accusation of atrocities being committed, and the message, I hope, is think again, because the international community is watching. There are people that are prepared to create dossiers like this, to submit them to the appropriate authorities, and to call for accountability.
Just a couple of final things. I mean, just on that, a lot of people actually may be shocked that the British government is standing aside whilst allowing British citizens to go to Israel and to fight, well, to be part of a genocide of one sort, which is what many of us would regard was happening to Gaza. And do nothing about it. I mean, the UK government may stand aside and say, well, in a way they wouldn't Russia, where they, without the international criminal court having tried Putin, they will say war crimes have been committed by Russia quite correctly. That's a fact. But that they're allowing British soldiers to go and fight in a territory when a body there, a signatory to the International Criminal Court, has issued arrest warrants for war crimes and crimes against humanity by Benjamin Netanyahu and his former defence minister Yoav Gallant. I mean, do you have any thoughts on that? That British soldiers are just freely, British citizens are freely able to go and to fight with the IDF with no legal repercussions?
Well, it is inherently a political question, perhaps more so necessarily than a legal one for me. But I do think when there is evidence that these atrocities are ongoing, it is absolutely something that the government should be looking at, because you're absolutely right. If the evidence is there more broadly, and you have bodies like the UN and Francesca Albanese and as the UN Special Rapporteur being a very outspoken voice for addressing the atrocities that have been committed, when you have Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch talking about these ongoing atrocities, then is it really right that people go out there and join that fight? If the answer is no, then it is perhaps something that does need to be looked at, but perhaps in the political sphere initially, before any legal action is taken.
Just finally, what would you like to see in terms of the next steps? Because a lot of people listening might think this is just too good to be true. The idea that justice, accountability of any description will actually be served when it comes to anything to do with Israel and its treatment of the Palestinian people. They just, people look at this and think, this is commendable, it's raising awareness, that's important in itself. That they will struggle to imagine waking up, getting a news alert which says British citizens have been arrested with allegations that they committed war crimes and crimes against humanity in Gaza. So what would you say, in terms of what you'd like to see next, and how realistic is this? How possible is this, that there could be some sort of justice and accountability in this country the way that you're fighting for?
Well, it really would be a watershed moment, wouldn't it, if we woke up and the newspaper reports were such that arrest warrants had either been issued or people had been arrested. In terms of what I want to see, I want to see the dossier taken seriously by the Met War Crimes team, and I'm sure they will. I want to see them look at it. I want them to use the tools at their disposal. They're a police force and a unit set up specifically to address these kind of issues. And so I want to see them conduct their own investigation using the tools at their disposal. The dossier we've provided, we say, is complex. We say it's compelling. But it's compiled by a team of researchers and a small group of lawyers without the resources of the Met Police and without recourse, perhaps, to cooperation with other countries and other forces. And so if they use the tools at their disposal, they will hopefully expand on the research that we've done and see where the evidence leads them. If the evidence leads, and this is as a lawyer what it really comes down to, if the evidence leads to the conclusion that there are reasonable prospects of conviction at the end of this, then there should be arrest warrants. In terms of how hopeful I am for that, it's evidence-led. But what I can say is that we met preliminarily with the War Crimes Unit before the submission outside New Scotland Yard on Monday. So we met with them, and that really was procedurally just to tee up the submission, to let them know what was happening and to have discussions about next steps. And they were completely open to that, supportive, if I can say that. But certainly we weren't met by some obstructive state machinery, which of the type that you might expect, perhaps cynically. And so every indication has been, I think, that they'll look at it, that they'll take it seriously, and we'll see where we end up with that. In terms of timeframes, I don't have them. It's a question for the Met Police. It will take some time. We accept that. But hopefully in the fullness of time, we'll see developments in this case.
Fantastic stuff. That was so clear. And, I think this is a really, really, really important development. And hopefully will have an impact in terms of challenging the impunity. I mean, this is the problem. Impunity reigns in this area. And the reason IDF soldiers often post their war crimes is they think they can get away with anything. And with alleged war crimes, such things lawyer. But hopefully this in itself will have some impacts there. This impunity is beginning to crumble. We've seen that, of course, with the arrest warrants issued by the International Criminal Court. So it's such an important case. For those who are watching, do share this video and leave comments. Press like, subscribe, all great, because then more people will obviously listen to what Sean has had to say. But Sean, thanks so much for joining us, and everything crossed in terms of how this case progresses.
You're very welcome. Thank you again.